What if I told you that a man got rejected 1,009 times, that he didn't make his first real money until his mid-60s, that the world laughed at his idea of selling chicken in a bucket until it made him a billionaire? This isn't a story about fast food. It's a story about obsession, about sleeping in your car with a dream, about rejection, and about how a white suit, a goatee, and a secret recipe with 11 herbs and spices turned a beaten-down ex-soldier into a global icon. This is not your feel-good success tale. This is the story of a man who got angry at the world for ignoring him, and then made the world eat his legacy. Welcome to the untold story of Colonel Harland Sanders. Chapter 1. The Failed Everything. Before he was Colonel, he was just Harland. Born in 1890, in a small dirt road town in Indiana, Harland Sanders didn't have a golden ticket. No wealth, no connections, no formal education. Just one thing: life punching him in the face repeatedly. At just 5 years old, his father died. By 7, he was already cooking for his siblings. By 10, he was working on a farm. By 13, he dropped out of school entirely. And what followed was decades of failure. Harland tried to be everything: streetcar conductor, railroad fireman, insurance salesman, tire seller, steamboat operator, even a lawyer. Guess how many worked out? 0. He got fired. Rejected. Quit. Rejected again. He argued with his bosses, cursed out customers, couldn't stand being told what to do. He wasn't cut out for rules, and rules weren't cut out for him. His personal life wasn't any smoother. He married young, had kids, lost one. His marriage fell apart. His reputation? Shaky at best. By his 40s, he was broke, angry, and unsure if he'd ever get anything right. But this is what makes Harland different. Where most people would have settled, he didn't. He wasn't chasing success anymore. He was chasing revenge. Revenge against the world that kept saying no. And revenge tastes best with crispy chicken skin. And it was during this low point, when he was running a small gas station in Corbin, Kentucky, that he started serving homemade food to travelers passing by. No branding, no franchise, just Harland cooking like he did as a kid, throwing everything into a frying pan and hoping someone would pay for it. Turns out, people loved it, not because it was fancy, but because it was honest, greasy, comforting. And Harland, for the first time in his chaotic life, felt like he was finally doing something right. This wasn't KFC, not yet, but it was the seed of a rebellion. A man who failed at everything was about to succeed at something that would outlive him. Chapter 2. The Gas Station Gunslinger. The gas station in Corbin, Kentucky wasn't just a pit stop. It was Harland Sanders' battlefield. He wasn't just pumping fuel. He was building his name, one fried chicken plate at a time. But the road to fame wasn't paved with golden arches. It was soaked in motor oil, peppered with shotgun shells, and seasoned with pride. Harland saw every traveler as a potential customer, and every customer as a chance to prove himself. He plastered painted signs across highways, claiming he had the best fried chicken in the South. But competition didn't like that, especially Matt Stewart, owner of the rival gas station across the road. The feud began with a sign. Harland placed one on the highway, pointing to his station. Stewart tore it down, so Harland put up another. Stewart destroyed it again. This went back and forth until Sanders, always stubborn, always escalating, marched over with a shotgun and nailed a new sign into Stewart's land with his own hands. That was the spark. Stewart showed up armed. Harland grabbed his own gun. But Sanders wasn't alone. He called for backup from 2 Shell Company officials. When the smoke cleared, Stewart was shot. One Shell official was dead. And Harland? Somehow not in jail. The shooting was ruled self-defense. This wasn't just a gas station anymore. It was a symbol of resistance. Harland wasn't just fighting for customers. He was fighting for respect. In a time where he had failed at everything, this gas station, these frying pans, this chicken, was the first thing he was willing to bleed for. And that story, it spread. Not just the flavor of his chicken, but the myth of the man behind it. The angry, relentless, proud gunslinger who turned a highway stop into a legend. People didn't just want food. They wanted to meet the guy who stared down a rival with a shotgun in one hand and a drumstick in the other. Harland was building more than a business. He was building a persona. Rough, rebellious, real. He wasn't a polished businessman. He was a survivor. And this reputation? It would stick longer than the oil on his apron. Bonus 1. The hustler in white. Before he became a colonel, Harland David Sanders was a walking resume with no consistency, but a burning need to survive. If you thought being rejected once or twice is tough, imagine reinventing your entire life every few years. That's exactly what Sanders did, not out of choice, but out of pure, unfiltered necessity. At 12, he dropped out of school, not for rebellion, for survival. From there, the world became his unpredictable, sometimes brutal, training ground. He worked as a farmhand, then tried painting horse carriages. That didn't stick. He moved on to streetcar conductor, rang the bell and all, then got fired. He studied law by correspondence, practiced briefly, but punched a client in the courtroom and got disbarred. Yes, seriously. Then he tried selling life insurance. No dice. He worked for the railroad, cleaned ash pans, became a blacksmith's helper, then jumped into steamboats. Later, he was a tire salesman. And that's before he became a ferry boat operator. Oh, and he also tried being a secretary in a chamber of commerce, a lighting manufacturer, and a railroad fireman. This wasn't a man chasing a dream. This was a man running from failure every single time, yet refusing to stop. Each job was a bruise, each firing a slap. But instead of collapsing, Sanders kept moving. He wasn't building a career, he was collecting tools. And later, he'd use them all. So when you see that white suit and think he had it all figured out, remember, that suit was ironed on top of decades of dirt, grease, and failure. Harland wasn't lucky. He was relentless. Chapter 3: The Recipe of Rebellion. Harland David Sanders didn't have a test kitchen. He had a tiny, smoky room behind a gas station, filled with frying pans, flour sacks, and an old pressure cooker he barely knew how to use. This wasn't gourmet cuisine. This was trial by grease. Day after day, Sanders experimented. He wasn't chasing elegance. He was chasing efficiency and flavor. How do you cook a juicy piece of chicken in half the time without losing its soul? Most fried chicken took 30 minutes. Harland didn't have that luxury. Travelers were impatient. Time was money. So he tinkered, pushed, ruined batch after batch until he found something insane: pressure frying. It was dangerous. Some early prototypes exploded, but Harland didn't care. He wasn't just cooking anymore. He was engineering rebellion. And that's when it happened. The birth of the 11 secret herbs and spices. Now, he never wrote it down. He guarded that formula like a treasure map. It wasn't just seasoning. It was the story of his life. Each spice, a failure he had survived. Each herb, a reminder of his past jobs, his humiliations, his stumbles. Salt, from the salt mines of his broken attempts. Paprika, from the fire in his gut. Garlic powder, for the sting of every deal gone wrong. And when people tasted it, they didn't just eat chicken. They tasted a man's obsession. Crunchy on the outside, war-torn on the inside. Word spread like wildfire. People didn't just stop for gas anymore. They stopped for that damn chicken. And slowly, that backroom became a destination. Harland Sanders had taken ordinary chicken and made it a ritual. But here's the secret no one tells you. The 11 herbs and spices aren't the real story. The real story is that Harland figured out what made people come back. Not the ingredients, the experience. The feeling of tasting something that wasn't just good. It was undeniably his. That's when he started dreaming bigger. Could this recipe survive beyond Corbin? Could it travel like the restless man who made it? Harland had no franchise plan, no MBA. What he had was a suit, a vision, and a flavor nobody could replicate. He wasn't selling food. He was bottling defiance. Every crunch of that chicken whispered, "I didn't quit. I cooked through the fire." Chapter 4: The Fall of a Fried Empire. Success, when it finally came to Harland David Sanders, came not like a gentle rain. It came like a flash flood. The gas station became a destination, then a restaurant, then another. His recipe was golden. His name was becoming legend. And the man who once slept in his car was suddenly shaking hands in white suits. For a moment, he believed it. Maybe this is it. But then, the storm. In the 1950s, a new highway was announced. A stretch of road that would bypass the town of Corbin entirely. Harland watched the plans like a man watches a bullet in slow motion. He pleaded, protested, but concrete doesn't care about chicken. When the highway opened, traffic vanished overnight. The restaurant that once buzzed with customers now echoed with silence. Tables empty, fryers cold. He tried to hold on, sold what he could, trimmed everything. But it wasn't enough. Harland was 65. Broke. Again. And here's the part that breaks most people. He had finally made it. And lost it all anyway. But not Harland. Not the man who had buried a brother at 7. Who had forged papers to join the army. Who had sold insurance door to door and been fired more times than he could count. He didn't cry. He packed. He took his pressure cooker, his suit, and his recipe, and hit the road. Literally. Harland drove across America, sleeping in his car, cooking chicken in diners, giving free samples to skeptical owners. He knocked on doors, got turned away, knocked again. Sometimes he sold nothing. Sometimes he sold just enough to keep going. Most people saw an old man with a pot of fried chicken. What they didn't see was a wildfire in a white suit. This wasn't a restart. This was a relentless continuation. He wasn't trying to be rich. He was trying to make people believe again. And slowly it worked. One diner, then 5, then dozens. The recipe spread, not like a brand, but like a legend whispered from kitchen to kitchen. Because Harland wasn't just selling chicken. He was reminding people what resilience tasted like. Chapter 5. The Man Who Wore the Brand. The story of Harland David Sanders wasn't just about fried chicken anymore. It was about identity. About myth. About a man becoming larger than life. And it all started with a suit. That white double-breasted suit. The black string tie. The polished shoes. He didn't just wear it to look clean. He wore it because it made people look twice. At gas stations, bus stops, meetings with grim-faced investors. He stood out like a preacher in a mosh pit. He wasn't rich yet. Not really. But he looked like he belonged to something bigger than money. And soon, people weren't just buying the chicken. They were buying the idea. A humble Southern man with a flawless recipe. The Colonel, the face on the sign. The man behind the myth. And Harland? He leaned into it. He became the Colonel. He legally changed his name to Colonel Harland Sanders after receiving a ceremonial title from the Kentucky governor. It wasn't military. It was marketing. But it worked like magic. Now, every restaurant he franchised carried not just his chicken, but his face. And as the money came in, so did the chaos. Managing franchises across the country wasn't as tasty as his original blend. Some stores cheapened the recipe. Others dropped quality for profit. Harland would storm in like a culinary crusader, tasting the gravy, then exploding if it wasn't up to his standard. He screamed. He argued. He threatened to pull his name, because this wasn't just chicken anymore. It was him, his reputation, his soul, his redemption. To many, he was a legend. To some, a stubborn old man in a white suit. But to Harland, he was proof that age didn't define legacy, that you could build something after you were supposed to be done, and you could do it in style. The white suit became iconic. So did the scowl. So did the raised eyebrow when the gravy tasted like wallpaper paste. He was a one-man brand, and he didn't care about being likable. He cared about being unforgettable. Because Harland David Sanders knew, legends aren't created, they're worn. Bonus 2. The man who became a brand. Harland David Sanders didn't just sell a recipe, he sold himself. And that might have been his most genius move. Most entrepreneurs try to distance themselves from their brand once money enters the picture. Sanders did the opposite. He leaned in, hard. He took the white suit, the cane, the goatee, and the Southern charm, and turned it into a full-blown character, one he'd play until the very end. After selling Kentucky Fried Chicken in 1964, Harland could have disappeared into comfortable retirement. But instead, he chose to stay front and center. He became the living logo. He toured new franchises, taste-tested chicken with his legendary brutal honesty, and gave fiery interviews where he would publicly bash places that served his recipe wrong. He wasn't just the Colonel in name. He became a one-man quality control squad, press agent, and spiritual mascot for every fried chicken fryer around the world. The Colonel traveled constantly, showing up unannounced to restaurants to make sure they lived up to his standards. If they didn't, he let them know loudly. Some franchisees hated it. Corporate didn't always appreciate it. But the public? The public loved it. Sanders became a mix between a cranky grandfather, a folk hero, and a culinary rebel. His stubbornness made him human. His dedication made him myth. Marketing executives didn't invent the Colonel. He invented himself. The suit, always white. The shoes, always polished. The string tie, never off. Wherever he went, he was Kentucky Fried Chicken. In an era before personal branding became a buzzword, Harland Sanders showed the world how it's done. And let's be real, how many brands can say their logo still speaks, walks, and sometimes yells from beyond the grave? Chapter 6. The Deal with the Devil. Success came knocking, not with fried chicken, but with a contract. By 1964, Colonel Harland Sanders had over 600 Kentucky Fried Chicken franchises across the United States and Canada. It was no longer a roadside hustle or a folksy local miracle. It was a corporation, and corporations have one thing in mind: growth. Rapid, relentless, international growth. Harland was 73. He was tired. Running hundreds of franchises meant meetings, standards, travel, lawsuits, inspections. It meant saying no to cheap chicken and hell no to synthetic gravy. He didn't want that life anymore. He wanted to retire in peace, maybe with a plate of real mashed potatoes. So when investors came with $2 million, a fortune for a man who once lived in a gas station, he took the deal. They would get the rights to the company. He would keep control of the quality, or so he thought. What he didn't realize was that corporate ambition has no taste buds. The new owners, smart, suit-wearing businessmen, started cutting costs. Instant mashed potatoes, canned green beans, gravy from powder. They called it efficiency. Harland called it garbage. And he wasn't silent. He sued them, publicly criticized them, told the press that their food tasted like wallpaper paste. Yes, that same food with his face on the bucket. But the damage was done. He had signed the papers. They owned the brand. He was just a mascot now. A man in a white suit with no control. To make it worse, the company started erasing the old-school charm, replacing it with fast food speed. They called it modernization. He called it betrayal. He felt like a ghost in his own empire, like the soul had been sold, even if the suit still smiled from every sign. Still, he never stopped being the colonel. He still visited stores, still judged their gravy, still gave hell to any manager who got sloppy, because even when they took the brand, they couldn't take the man. Chapter 7. The Colonel rises again. You can't buy off a soul like Harland Sanders. Not with millions, not with trademarks, and certainly not with instant mashed potatoes. After the sale, most men would have ridden off into the sunset with a cigar in one hand and a golden watch in the other. But Harland? He was just getting started again. Though he had technically sold his company, he hadn't sold his standards. And when those standards were violated, he didn't stay quiet. He drove from franchise to franchise, uninvited and unbothered, inspecting kitchens, questioning managers, and tasting the gravy. If it didn't meet his expectations, he let them know loudly. He'd scold employees, demand better ingredients, and tell customers they were being fed slop. Yes, the man whose face sold the chicken was openly calling it garbage. A walking paradox, a living protest. The suits at KFC headquarters didn't know what to do. You couldn't sue the man. He was the brand. You couldn't silence him. He'd just shout louder. He became the most unpredictable weapon and the most iconic liability in fast food history. But deep down, Sanders wasn't doing it out of revenge. He wasn't bitter for the money or the fame. He was bitter because someone had taken his dream and watered it down. And to him, that was worse than losing it altogether. Outside the boardrooms, he became a living legend. He made TV appearances, gave interviews, and even launched lawsuits to protect the quality of his name. Fans loved his stubbornness. To them, he wasn't just a businessman. He was a guardian of flavor. He stood for something in a world that was increasingly cutting corners and selling speed over soul. And while he no longer held power inside the company, his spirit haunted every corner of it. Every bucket with his face, every commercial, every fried drumstick, all carried the weight of a man who refused to let go. His comeback wasn't about reclaiming the business. It was about reminding the world what it meant in the first place. Even into his 80s, he wore the white suit with pride. He shook hands with fans, visited restaurants, and posed for photos. He didn't slow down. In fact, some say he became more alive after losing the company. Because for Colonel Sanders, the true legacy wasn't in owning a brand. It was in defending a standard. Chapter 8. The Final Bucket. By the time Harland Sanders turned 85, most people would have written their final chapter. He, on the other hand, was still traveling over 200,000 miles a year, visiting restaurants, shaking hands, and making sure no one messed up the chicken. The man simply didn't slow down. His body aged, sure, but his mission remained timeless. He wasn't doing it for profit anymore. That ship had sailed. His goal was legacy. He knew the world had turned corporate, fast, artificial. But he refused to let the world forget the taste of real effort, the power of a handshake, and the value of a name. For Sanders, the white suit wasn't a costume, it was armor. The string tie wasn't fashion, it was identity. He had built himself not just into a man, but into a message. In the last years of his life, he traveled across countries, not just to promote chicken, but to speak at schools, community events, and small-town gatherings. He shared stories of failure, poverty, and starting over, and the way he told them made you believe you could do it too. The Colonel had become more than a cook. He had become folklore, an icon carved out of sweat, spices, and sheer stubbornness. On December 16, 1980, the world said goodbye to Harland Sanders. But truth be told, he had already become immortal. His face still beams from every KFC bucket. His name is whispered by every entrepreneur who started late. His spirit lingers in the back kitchens where young cooks dream of making it big. He never needed a statue or a museum. His legacy is edible, emotional, and global. The Colonel's life was never about chicken. It was about doing things the hard way, even when shortcuts were easy. It was about believing that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. And in a world full of brands chasing relevance, Harland David Sanders proved that authenticity, the real kind, never goes out of style. So next time you walk into a fried chicken joint and see that white bearded man smiling back from the menu, remember, he wasn't just a mascot. He was the man who bet on himself at 65 and won.